Next, from Chicago and the Illinois Association of School Boards annual conference, we hear three lawmakers and Lieutenant Governor Sheila Simon tell school board members what they see as the financial challenges in 2012. The issues of school consolidation, pension reform, and transportation funding are among the topics. This runs about 1 hour and 20 minutes.
First of all, we do have Senator Dave Luechtefeld. Senator Luechtefeld is from the 58th District in Oakville in south central Illinois. We have Senator Susan Garret from the 29th District in the Lake Forest area, just north of here. We have Representative Roger Eddy, who is from the 109th District in Hudsonville in southeastern Illinois. Representative Eddy has been kind enough to pinch hit for us. The original schedule was to have Representative Frank Montino, here today. I talked to him later in session last week. Thursday afternoon, I went and talked to him. He said, I'm coming, I'm all excited, it's going to be great. I go back to the office, get a phone call from his secretary, and Speaker Madigan had called a revenue committee for today in Springfield. And Frank is on the revenue committee, so he could not make it. And again, we thank Representative Eddy for filling in. And with that, I think we can cover a lot of ground. We also will have today Lieutenant Governor Sheila Simon with us today. She is not going to be here, obviously, at the moment, but she will be here before we're done, and will be giving remarks as well. So with that, I'll take up no more time, and we will get to the business. And please welcome Senator Susan Garret.
So, it's great to be here. I want to thank Ben. He's one of our favorite people in Springfield. He keeps us on task and makes sure that we do the right thing at all times. We want him to agree with us as legislators more often, but he does a great job representing his constituents. And thank you to everybody who's here today. Somebody said this is standing room only, and I started getting a little nervous because we have some easy subjects to discuss today, after all. I mean, I got the agenda and I kept putting it over to the side because I'm not sure I want to talk about pensions and school consolidation and the budget, but reality has struck and it's time to, be honest with everybody. We have some challenging times in Illinois. We are confronted every time we turn around, every day that I pick up the newspaper, there is another budget issue. And as we get more challenging budget issues thrown at us, we try to resolve them, and I'd like to think in a bipartisan way. Senator Luechtefeld and I have worked together on the Education Committee over the years in the Senate, and the same with Representative Eddy. But having to get sign-off and agreement and compromise from all of the different impacted and affected parties is very, very challenging. I always say that Illinois is 3 states in one. And this goes to the consolidation issue, of course. You've got the city of Chicago, state number 1. Then you've got the collar counties, where I come from. And then you've got downstate, south of I-80. And while it seems like we're one big happy family, we have different ways in which we approach things, such as how to consolidate schools, whether or not that's the right thing to do, how do we take care of our regional offices of superintendents, the other issue that we've resolved at least for another year, and how we deal with pension. That's across the whole state, but still we have different pension systems. So I'm only allowed to speak for a few minutes. We did take on the pension challenge, the whole reform issue, over the last 2 years. And as you know, it's been moved, from one veto session. Now we're going to address it in the regular session. But the reason for this is that we can't really get agreement. It's, in my opinion, not Democrats that are at fault or Republicans that are at fault. It's just that we haven't really struck the right chord with all the impacted parties. And we really need to do that. We really need to know that we are doing this in a fair way. So everybody knows we need extra money. Everybody knows that our pension payments are unaffordable, but we can't rob Peter to pay Paul. So we have to get all the guys to sit down to the table and really hammer this out so we have a resolution before we leave Springfield in May, or the end of May, I should say. We did take on school consolidation. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. Since I've been in office, which is almost 14 years, we've never had an agreement on school consolidation. I'm not sure that we will be able to come to an agreement, but we're taking steps to get there. I know that Sheila Simon is going to talk about her commission that she set up to really investigate different options and opportunities. And we put together what I'm going to call shared services. I call it step number 1 in addressing the costs that schools incur. So what we're asking school districts to do, and we're requiring school districts to do, is to try to share the cost of many different services, like transportation, cafeteria services, accountants, purchasing art supplies, all the different kinds of ways that we can share services and reduce our costs. That is a bill that actually passed unanimously from both the Senate and the House last year. It was signed into law last summer. And then we're going to take a look at what each school district can do to shave some extra costs from their expenditures by sharing services with other schools. They could even share with municipalities. But to start sharing with other schools and see if that will diminish some of this, what we've been told, $100 million in savings that we would realize if, in fact, we went forward with a consolidation of school districts. I've been in education since I became an elected member of the General Assembly, which was in 1998. In the House, I served for 4 years. I served on education committees there and then also in the Senate. So education is near and dear to me. I have a lot of faith and support of our current teachers, and I support administrators as well. So I don't take a side. I'm very bipartisan when it comes to supporting the schools and what it takes to keep them up and functioning and in good financial shape. So I look forward to commenting on some of these issues later.
Thank you, Senator. Next we'll have Senator Luechtefeld.
Well, good to be here. This is I've never been to this conference. I've been in education most of my adult life, and I've never been to this conference. Of course, I wasn't, I didn't make the big money the administrators that do, and all that sort. There are some administrators here today, I think, right? A little bit about myself. I spent some 38 years in a little high school in southern Illinois called Oakville as a basketball coach, baseball coach, athletic director, and history and government teacher. Taught a little psychology and things like that. I had a really good time. If I had to do it over again, I would do it over. My wife and I, my wife taught there at that same high school for 37 years. So mathematics, and we had a good life. We never made a whole lot of money, but we had a really fun time, great place to raise kids, that sort of thing. When it came to the legislature, I guess there's two things I've tried to do. Most legislators, their backgrounds are really, they're really not in education. Even though, have you ever heard a legislator who did not say they were going to fix education? They're all going to fix it. And the problem is, they don't really know how, and there are certainly a lot more experts on how to fix education than we are. I happen to have been in education all my life, and I really can't say that I know how to fix it, but there are two things I've tried to do. Number one, I've tried to say to the other legislators, especially in our caucus, that education is not completely broken. There's a lot of good stuff going on out there. And that is, I'm not too sure that legislators sometimes feel that way. They want to fix something, but they're not real sure what it is nor how to get that done. The second thing I've tried to do is basically say to other legislators, schools have enough to do. We really don't need to put a lot more on them. A lot of mandates, and I think there's a lot of legislators. I've heard Senator Garret, for instance, say that we do mandate an awful lot of things, and there's only so much time in the day. It's hard to do the things that you do right now, And in fact, it's a much tougher business than when I started. You know, I for instance, was taught in a little school with a lot of really good parents. And that's easy. It truly is. I've often thought that if you really wanted to fix education, you fix the parents, and we're going to be fine. We'll figure it out. You know, when you get kids coming to school who have no real discipline, no respect for authority, no real desire to learn, no goals, it's very difficult. It is very difficult. And that percentage of kids that come to school like that is getting higher and higher. From when I first started teaching in 1962. It's a long. Many of you weren't around at that time. So if you could. Now, how do you fix parents? If you will, maybe stay after and maybe tell us if you would figure that out. I personally believe, and this is the reason it is a little hard to be upbeat. I personally believe it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm not real sure how you turn that around. I really don't. It is a very difficult issue. But the one thing that I've come to the conclusion is we have to deal with what we have. You know, we can't get around that. If we're dealing with kids who come to school without respect for authority, without a lot of discipline, we still have to deal with that. And we have to keep, figure new ways, better ways, look at best practices, look at what other people are doing, and try to make those changes. So if there's anything, I can remember when I first ran for office the very first time. I just came out as a teacher, and you want to get the IEA endorsement, and so I met with a number of IEA members from different schools in my district, and there were two young ladies there from who didn't really, they weren't for me, they were for my opponent, and you could tell from the questions they were asking. And one of them looked at me and said, "What's your plan to fix education?" And I said, wow. First of all, it's not completely broken, and secondly, there aren't a lot of, nothing's easy, and there aren't a lot of, I have some ideas, but to completely fix what's wrong, I'm not real sure I can do that. And the other one raised her hand and says, "I don't believe it. You're running for office. You want us to support you, and you don't even know how to fix education." And I can remember saying to her, and by the way, I didn't get her vote. I can remember saying to her, "Ma'am, you haven't been in the business long enough, or you wouldn't say what you just said, because there are no real easy fixes." So, this year, for instance, or last year in session, as you know, we did some education reform. I think there were some good things that happened in that education reform. It was not easy. It never is easy. As Senator Garret said, you have different groups out there who are pulling in different directions. And anytime you're going to reform something, you know that you're going to probably have to deal with someone or some groups that really don't want a lot of change. In fact, they want no change. And that is never going to be easy. Now, sometimes, and this is what kind of happened this year. We've known we needed reforms in education for a long, long time. And we didn't get there. I mean, there are a lot of things that should have been done more, but we did. There was some progress. But you'll find that when progress usually takes place, it's when all the groups realize that there is going to be some changes. There are going to be changes. And I better be at the table, or those changes may be something that we don't like. And I think that's kind of what came together. There were several groups last year who came out and spent a lot of money. And it's amazing that money has to do this. I mean, they spent a lot of money on campaign contributions saying we needed to make reforms in education. Well, sure enough, they made the right donations to the right people in leadership, and in the process, there was going to be a reform. And so in the process, we ended up with, I think, some things that made a difference. Consolidation, Lieutenant Governor Simon will be here, as she is on a committee, or heads a committee. I'm on that committee. I think so is Representative Eddy on that committee to consolidate. I'm not real sure that's exactly where we're headed, but at least I think they've taken testimony from an awful lot of people, and she will talk about that. The other two issues, I think, are pensions and the budget. First of all, on pensions, You know, I get an awful lot of people who, as a legislature, who simply say to me, "We have to make we don't want any change in the pensions. We're happy with our pension," and I understand that. You know, many people feel that they put in enough money and that they believe that those pensions ought to be paid. The problem is it's in trouble, and it's in real trouble, and it could go bankrupt if things aren't done. So there have to be some changes made to the pension. Now, what should they be? I too believe, as Senator Garret said, that there should be some input from all the different people who are involved, from people who are on, in the pension system, from teachers, from administrators, and of course state workers, because there's 5 pensions involved in this particular reform. It should, and when does that happen? I believe pensions will be reformed, and I honestly believe before it's over, everyone will be involved, because I think there'll be a point where not only teachers and state workers will realize that we are headed for reform. It's going to happen. You better get on board to determine what it will be. And usually in a democracy, you only deal with things when they become a crisis. And that's sort of where we're at right now. And hopefully that can be reached, because it's not going to go away. I doubt if there'll be pension reform in this veto session, but it won't go away. It's going to be back in the regular session, and if it doesn't happen in the regular session, it'll be back the next year, because this is a time bomb that will sooner or later go off. The other issue, of course, is the budget. I wish I could be positive. Maybe I'll tell you what, Representative Eddy, you do the positive stuff, okay? We're in bad shape, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. In fact, it may get a lot worse. It truly would. Let me just give you this scenario. Over the last 3 years, this kind of money has come into this state above and beyond our normal budget money that comes in. We borrowed about $8 billion. Now, not to build roads and bridges and things like that, but just to run government. About $8 billion over the last 3 or 4 years. We've passed an income tax which will bring in about $7 billion. That's 15. The federal government gave us $10 billion of stimulus money 2.5 years ago. That's $25 billion new dollars that have come into the state, above and beyond what we normally take in. And we can't pay our bills. Does that tell you something about how bad things were? And does that tell you something about how tough it's going to be to get out of it? This is an ugly situation that was left go way too long. Way too long. You get to the point where you can't borrow from the pension fund, you can't steal from other funds, you can't borrow your way out of it anymore, and you can't move the payment cycle back anymore. We're there. And that is something I'm sure that Representative Roger Eddy will turn that around, and when you leave here, you will feel good about yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Coach. On that cheery note, I just wanted to say a few things on many of the ideas that have already been expressed here today, but to tell you that some of these things we've been working on as well. We understand and agree with Senator Garret that there are ways to share some services and share some things among school districts, and we have been doing that. The organizations who are having this conference, school boards, administrators, and school business officials, they have for years been sponsoring insurance pools for folks to pool their money, pool their resources, get better rates for property casualty insurance, for workers' compensation insurance. We have a pool for financial assets, a liquid asset pool for short-term investments for school districts. Again, by pooling those monies, getting higher rates of return, which helps school districts. And also an energy consortium, which allows school districts to share and pool utilities, electricity, where you can purchase electricity for cheaper rates than on the open market, for natural gas and so forth. So to that extent, we are doing that. We understand there are more places we can go, and we have worked with Senator Garret, and we'll do so in the future to look at more of those types of things. On the Education Reform Act, Senate Bill 7, there is not enough time in this day to tell you what that does. It is very complicated. Generally, what we are telling our members is that this learning curve is huge. There are some very good ideas there. There are very good changes to current school code law in there. But right now, it's time to figure out what those mean. And generally, school board members, you need to be acquainted with this and learn the basic principles of this new law. But right now, I think it's really sitting at the doorstep of the administrators, the superintendents, and the principals to find the nuts and bolts of this thing so they know how to implement it. So that's what's going on now. Let me just tell you briefly, very briefly, what it does. A year ago, January of 2010, we passed a law called the Performance Evaluation Reform Act. P-E-R-A, PARA. Remember that. You're going to hear it a million times in the next 5 years. Generally, what PARA did is say that you have to look at student performance in a teacher's evaluation and a principal's evaluation. It ties for the first time student performance to their evaluation. This year in Senate Bill 7, it takes the next step, and it ties now that evaluation to teacher employment. So in other words, the kids have to learn or you get a bad evaluation. You get a bad evaluation, you can now be dismissed. And in many cases, it's regardless of seniority, regardless of tenure. Those are the major types of changes that it does. Again, we don't have time to go into that. There are many other panels going on through the course of this weekend here with real live attorneys who can explain this to you. But it is going to be a big issue that you all will be needing to become familiar with. Consolidation Commission, again, is working. We do have representation on that. The executive directors of the associations who are sponsoring this conference are all sitting on that commission as well. So we do have representation there. And like Senator Luechtefeld on the pension reform, I'm just going to turn it over to Representative Eddy, because I understand he has all the answers to that. So please welcome Representative Roger Eddy.
Thank you, Ben. I think, I'm not sure. Look, I think the issues that we face have been outlined pretty well. I'm just going to very briefly review a couple of things related to these topics and hopefully leave a lot of time for you to ask questions, because I think that's the most important part of any type of program is that you have the issues that are most important to you addressed.
But you have to solve the problems.
And that was my attempt to try to steer away from the actual solutions. No, look, the budget is as Senator Luechtefeld has stated, not going to get better. It is going to get much worse before it gets better. I'm on the Education Appropriations Committee in the House. I'm the minority spokesperson on that committee. And the approach that the House took this year, and by the way, the first time in the 9 years that I've been on the General Assembly, we took this approach, is we actually tried to come up with a calculation to the best extent possible of how much revenue the state was going to take in the next fiscal year. And we, together, in a House resolution, agreed on both sides of the aisle that we would not appropriate any more money than the amount of revenue that is supposed to come in. Now, that seems like a very common sense and logical approach to budgeting, right? That's the first time in the 9 years I've been in the General Assembly that approach was taken. And the result of that approach was, I think the budget amount, and they were a little different from the House and the Senate. I think the Senate appropriations was a little higher with the calculation. Yeah, and in the House, I think we ended up at about $33.2 billion. The next thing we did, which I think is significant, is we made a subtraction from that amount of the entire pension payment and all debt service. We didn't borrow money to make the pension payment. We actually subtracted the amount necessary to make the full payment to the 5 systems, And we ended up with, I think, around $24 billion. Now, that ought to tell us something right there. $33.2 billion in revenue, spendable revenue after debt service, all the way down to 24. The next step was the Revenue Committee co-chairs, or the minority and majority spokesperson, figured out an average of the last 5 years' appropriations to the 5 appropriations committees, what the rolling percentage was, and they said, okay, of this 24 point whatever billion, education gets 27%, because that's your rolling average. Problem was, when you took 27% times that $24 billion, it was around $200 million less than the fiscal year before. And I got to tell you, when you go through this, the budget line by line by line, and you try to find a couple $100 million to cut out of it, it's not possible to do without cutting programs that people have a lot invested in, and it's not possible to do without cutting programs that have to do with general state aid, mandated categorical spending, and this year, even early childhood education took a little bit of a hit. So the same theory rolled forward brings us to a budget in FY13 that appears to be under even more pressure because of 2 basic escalating costs. One is the pension payment. Just the other day, the pension payment for next year was recalculated at $1 billion more than we had anticipated. $1 billion more. Medicaid costs also $700 or $800 million increase. That's about $1.7, $1.8 billion in additional budget pressures. And if you talk to people who want to project what kind of revenue increases there might be in the next year based on growth, they're talking around 2%, maybe a little bit more than 2%. So if you take that figure times the $33.2 billion, you might have $600 or $700 million in revenue growth with about a $1.7 billion pressure on the other side. Now, you can do the math. If we're going to use the same type of calculation and we're going to take percentages, right, then 27% of that shortfall would also then put pressure on the education budget for additional cuts. And as I stated, there weren't very many places to go last year to make those cuts that didn't hurt, and there's going to be even fewer to go this year. People call it the low-hanging fruit. I don't think there's any low-hanging fruit. Pension-wise, the biggest problem and the largest portion of the unfunded liability in the pension system is due to the fact that the state did not make the required payments a number of times over several administrations and even back decades. My issue with any of the pension reform bills that have come forward so far is they do not address head-on the single biggest contributor to the problem with the pension system. And that is, there's nothing in Senate Bill 512 that fixes the single biggest problem, or even language that makes it more difficult to skip payments. And I don't think until you address that issue, you can really say you're fashioning a bill that has pension reform in it. Now, you can increase the contributions for members all you want to, and you can shave the benefits all you want to. But unless you make the payment to the system, I don't care what the benefits are, the system it's not going to be funded. So we have to concentrate, I think, on the most important problems with the system in order for the reform bill to make any sense. Education reform in general, Senate Bill 7, I think we're finding out as we go around the state that the education bill was something that everyone had a lot of agreement on. There are some very, very good things in it. Major change to me is the fact that we are going to use our product, student performance, in a significant way in evaluating individuals whose job it is and responsibility is to teach. Now, it's very complicated to do that in a fair manner, and as we implement it, we're going to find out a lot of things about that, a lot of problems. What we have to be willing to do is take those lessons back and amend or fashion language that is going to make implementation possible without tremendous risk of litigation. And I think right now in education reform, we're finding out that perhaps our biggest concern is some of the misunderstandings or some of the potential for litigation once this is implemented. But I think if we can train people correctly to evaluate teachers on a performance model, both superintendents and principals, we're on the right track with this. And it's something that can really have a significant effect, positive effect on education. Finally, and this is This is an issue you're going to hear a lot more about from Lieutenant Governor Simon, who has joined us. Has to do with the legislation this spring that created a commission to discuss and make recommendations to the General Assembly related to reorganization, consolidation, or other types of efficiencies that school districts might look at in these very difficult fiscal times. I serve on that commission, and I got to tell you, I appreciate very much the fact that Lieutenant Governor Simon has taken on this challenge, because it's not a football you want to catch. This is a difficult issue, both politically and really from the standpoint of history and what this state has come to believe in as far as local control and the way it's almost a culture in this state. So she's taken it on. She has done a terrific job of bringing individuals in to talk to the commission about how we might approach this in a manner that is not threatening and that is collaborative with communities. And on many, many occasions, I have heard her state that the intent of this commission is not to force anyone to do anything, but in many ways to perhaps get the state out of the way, or to provide easier pathways, or to be a better partner as school districts look for ways that they can be efficient together. So I always appreciate the opportunity to discuss issues on education, and I want to thank all of you. How many board members? Raise your hand if you're a board member in here. Leave your hand if you're getting paid. Okay. I appreciate very much your willingness to take public service, because it is critically important to the success of school districts. In the model we have in this state of local governance, that we have individuals like you who are willing to step up. And it's not going to be easy in the next several years. You're going to be making some very difficult decisions, and for that I am grateful. I honestly don't mind working on these issues, but I certainly don't have the solutions. We're going to have to come up with those together, and I know that some of the best ideas come from the field, and I would appreciate any of you who have some ideas about efficiencies, or certainly things that we can do to make your jobs easier as you try to provide a quality education to your students. Let us know what those things are. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Eddy. And I think we have to call for some kind of investigation. When you asked that last question, I think one hand stayed up back there on who was getting paid. And also on the issue of the legal ramifications of Senate Bill 7, the Illinois Council of School Attorneys are meeting today upstairs, right above us. Have been there since 8 o'clock this morning. I think there are probably 120 school lawyers in there. And they probably have 120 different interpretations of that bill. With us now, please welcome our Lieutenant Governor of the state of Illinois, Sheila Simon.
Thank you very much. Hey, thank you, and sorry to come in late, but I'm very pleased to be here with all of you. Ben, thank you for the invitation. Senator Garret, Representative Eddy, and my senator, Dave Luechtefeld. Always happy to be here with the gang and with all of you who work so hard on what we all want to do, is move education forward. Let me tell you about, I saw the sign outside. It says legislative hot topics, and it sounds pretty exciting. Let me tell you about how you can get in on shaping what I hope will be a legislative hot topic as we move forward in the spring session. And that's what Representative Eddy mentioned when the governor delivered his budget address last spring. Kind of a downer of a budget address, lots of cut. And then he also mentioned we want to work on school consolidation. And as any good Southern Illinoisan, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This is not something that sounded really appealing to me as an automatic idea. And gradually it went through the process, and the legislature came up with the idea that there ought to be a commission to look into this. And I thought, I'm in a good spot to be able to steer that commission. I'm going to volunteer to have that target painted on my back, and I would like to be there to shape that conversation, because among other things, I think where I'm from, I know the importance of a school to a community identity, right? That's pretty significant for a whole lot of places. And I thought I can help to shape this conversation. So the first thing I did is to talk with the folks who are advocates of consolidation and say, when you talk about consolidation, what is it that you're hoping to get to? And it really boils back down to that they want to make sure all kids, no matter where they are, have opportunity in their education, and they want to make sure that school funds are spent efficiently. And I think everyone can agree on that, right? Where we don't agree is that consolidation is some kind of automatic remedy to get to those two goals. So I've set up the commission, and Dave and Roger are both on the commission, and I appreciate their service on that commission. And we're looking at just those two goals. How do we make sure our students have opportunity? How do we make sure that we're spending our money efficiently? And sometimes the answer to those questions is through consolidation. That's why some districts are already looking at consolidation, but not necessarily, right? That's not the answer for everyone. And in fact, I think if you've got a really small district that's doing a great job and spending money efficiently, what we ought to say as a state to that district is, thank you very much. Let's get out of the way and let you continue doing a good job. But where there are issues to be gained by working together, one district with another district on purchasing, on buying health insurance, on sharing class opportunities by distance learning, then I think we want to look into that, and I think we want to make sure that the structure of how we govern schools in the state does not stand in the way of you working with other districts. So that's what we are working on. We've got a survey posted on my website, Lieutenant Governor's website, where you can hop on and add any ideas that you have, complaints, suggestions. We're open to all of it. That survey will be available for you to participate in through December 2nd. And what we've been doing as a commission is gathering ideas. We've had 4 hearings across the state, a lot of input from a lot of people, a lot of great ideas that we will then divide into working groups and put forward what our legislative agenda needs to be based on what we learn and based on where we all want to go together. So that's what we've been up to, and it's been absolutely wonderful because of the participation of folks who understand the value of local control, who understand the goals that we all have for our kids, and that there's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all. Oh, Tom is on our commission too. Thank you for being a part of it. And that we really need to be able to say, here's how we can get there. You might get there a different way than you might get there, and we want to accommodate that. We want to make sure that we facilitate the best in our schools across the state, no matter what size the school is, no matter where the school is. So it's been a lot of fun. I look forward to working with all of you on continuing that process. Thanks very much.
Now we have a captive audience here. That, you're all between them and the door, so they can't sneak by you. We would be glad to open this up to questions of any of our panelists. Anyone? Yes, sir.
I was superintendent of small district of LaSalle County. I've never been more happier in terms of the changes and the things that are coming from Senate Bill 7, Senate Bill 315. I think they're outstanding. But also, I'm extremely upset in terms of how the ROEs have been treated. If you want some entity to lead us in terms of this change, then you have to support the Regional Office of Education. They're there, they work with us, they know what we need. And Roger, thank you for your support in that issue. You've been outstanding in reference to that. I appreciate it a great deal, but we need the Regional Offices of Education. They need to be funded. And that will help us in terms of Common Core and all these other positive, great changes that are coming about. It will help us out immeasurably. Please support the Regional Office of Education. Thank you.
We'll let anybody, just kind of give your view.
So, to whomever, the superintendent, a very good point. As you know, one of the last bills that we voted on when we were in Springfield last week was to ensure that the ROEs were funded for 1 year. So let me tell you about that bill. So I sat on the Education Committee, as I already told you, and as we're going through the bill, it had already passed the House. We realized that this task force or commission that's been put in place to really take a look at it and make recommendations actually goes into the next fiscal year. So the 1 year would have actually turned into 2 years, had we not caught that, and that second year, it could have been a real problem because, again, we'd be asking the municipalities to pay out of their fund the cost of the ROE salaries. So we caught that, and what we did was we said that this task force that's looking at what do we do with the ROEs, should we keep them as is, should we make some changes, whatever, that task force has to report their findings by April 1st. This is going to be a trailer bill that we'll hear in January. And that by the time we leave Springfield in May or June, that we have to get this issue resolved. So the ROEs are not stranded without any salary for another, for an additional year. So that part is out of the way. And it could have been another disaster, really, in all fairness. So it's interesting how these bills are written and structured. You almost have to have an attorney go through all of them just to make sure that things don't happen. I'm from the north. I realize I'm probably the only person. Is there anybody from Northern Illinois besides? Okay, thanks. So this is a concern, obviously, across the state. And I have heard from many of the ROEs that they don't want to be in this fist fight, caught in the middle of, cutting funds, and they're the problems, just like everything else that we're witnessing. So I have a good feeling that some changes will take place. My feeling is that the ROEs are going to stay in place because they actually do provide a function. But like anything else, it's probably important to take a look, make sure that we can find some efficiencies and economies of scale and be able to move forward. So that's my hope.
Well, first of all, I think at least most of the people up here do support. I think all of us do support the regional superintendents of schools. What happened to them was good. I often thought that when the governor gave his address, that the night before the speech, they were sitting around the mansion, and the governor said, "Is there anything we could cut?" And some staffer said, "Let's cut the regional superintendent of schools." Okay, fine, let's do that. And that's because there was very little thought given to what will they do. Who will do what they do? No thought at all of that, and that's not obviously not good. And I think that proved not to be good. I can tell you this though, that there are legislators, and I think the governor's office, who really believe that there may not be a need for regional superintendent's offices. So this is not going to be an easy chore to get them funded. I mean, the way we're funding them right now is not a good way. It is a bad precedent to set, to take local money, and it's just a bad road to go down. We did it and I know as Senator Garret said, I was on the committee with her, and I think that there were some who really didn't want to do that, but basically said this is the only way we can do it this year. And after that, hopefully there will be something. Now, keep in mind that in the bill, there is a thing called a little bit of consolidation again of those regions. So that is I think going to be talked about by a committee, what kind of recommendations they would make to consolidate some of those regions. I personally believe that unless you can find some other, let's say that you do away with the regional superintendent schools. Who will do the things they do? Well, maybe the state board. Well, the state board doesn't have enough help to do it right now. They'll be doing it from Springfield. It won't be local, and it's just, and they're going to have to hire new people. So the expense of the whole thing may be as great as it is right now. So hopefully there can be some reasonable minds to work that out. I know there will be a push to consolidate some of those regions. Now, I don't know how you feel about that. We did that if you'll remember, if you've been around long enough, they were consolidated once. I don't know how many they had before. I think right now they have 44, 45 of them. Before that they had 57 of them, and there could be another attempt to do that. But hopefully there will be, that they don't have to go through another year like they've gone through this time.
Well, first of all, if we're going to have a public policy debate related to mandates, state, local, we need to have the debate before we take the action. We have to have a plan. What happened was an injustice. That I can't describe it any other way. And it could have been corrected.
It could have been corrected in some simple ways. First of all, for the salary portion of this, we're talking about $9.5 million in a $33.2 billion budget. It's $9.5 million. Now, the way things are going, we're going to look at every nickel and every dollar, but the governor had an opportunity, and it's happened before. Once he found out that there was no way to pay them in any other source, rescinded his amendatory veto. It's happened before in this state. This was forced on regional superintendents by someone who simply, in my view, didn't care. And that's not right. And we should thank the regional superintendents for one thing, for sure. And that's the fact that for several months, they continued to work and to do the job that they had taken an oath to perform. And they did it without pay. And I'm not sure how many people in the General Assembly would have done the same thing if we just stopped getting paid. So we need to thank them for that, number one. Absolutely. You know, these are individuals with children. Some of these individuals had to go on food stamps. We had one individual whose husband was in the military in Afghanistan, and only to see back home his pay cut, no paycheck for home. It was an absolute injustice. Now, going forward, if we're going to have this discussion, we need to keep a couple of things in mind. First of all, these are elected officials. Prior to the next election, if we're going to have a public policy change on the duties of regional superintendents, how many they're going to be, that needs to be planned out in a fashion that shows some diligence. Now, I was named to that commission yesterday, to the regional, to that commission yesterday. And I think the best approach, this is just my personal opinion, let's examine all of the duties and responsibilities of the regional superintendent school. Let's take them one by one. Let's do the work. My first option for some of these, whatever the mandate is to ask ourselves this question: is it even necessary? Are there some mandates that we can just plain agree aren't necessary and we can relieve schools and the government from that mandate first? If there's a mandate that we all feel should continue, let's talk about the best way to deliver that service and agree on how it's going to be delivered, but do it in a thoughtful manner, not in a manner that's going to put folks on the firing line again. And I agree with Senator Garret. The way bills are written sometimes and as quickly as they pass, there are mistakes in a lot of bills. And when I read the August date in the original bill, I said that should be done when we're doing the budget in the spring. And a trailer bill is absolutely necessary in this case. Because we need to do it when we do the budget, so this doesn't happen again next year. This is not a good solution. This is a forced solution caused, in my opinion, by a lack of work, a lack of diligence, and was our only choice. The other way this could have been corrected was the Speaker could have filed a motion to override the veto. He refused to do that. We had no other choice. I would have voted for an override. That would have been my first choice to vote for. But the bill sponsor of the appropriation bill is the only person that can file the override, and the Speaker did not file that override motion. Somebody said to me, well, you can drop an appropriations bill for $9.5 million and we can just vote on your version of the bill. Let me ask you something. If the Speaker's not willing to file a motion to override his own amendatory veto, what do you think would have happened to my appropriation bill? So we need to work. We need your input. We absolutely need your input on this, especially as we start looking at those services. We need to get it right, and we need to treat these people fairly.
All right. Thank you. And I can't defend the process that was used and what went on. What's interesting to me is that a group of people who, by many folks, were seen as bureaucrats, as administrators, have now really proven to everyone that at heart they're educators and public servants. And I think that's been a positive step forward for everyone to recognize. This is one of those things, though, like school district size, where there are vast differences from top to bottom of the state. Vast differences in what the ROEs do from place to place. So it makes it hard for everyone to have a common assessment of what goes on. So I'm absolutely with Roger, and on our Classrooms First Commission, I think we're going to look at the same issue. What are the functions? Where's the best way to get those functions? Where's the best place to get those functions done? And make sure that we get our fundamental job done. Because in a lot of places, those regional superintendents are in fact centers of efficiency, that they keep particularly small districts going in terms of grant opportunities, in terms of teacher training. So there's a lot to be looked at that would be very hard to replace in any other kind of a way. So we've got a lot of opportunity to do it right now. I'm looking forward to that.
I have an announcement. This is a really good time for it. We had this microphone here. It's got this little contraption on it. And the reason we had this thing hooked to it, because we are being videotaped on the Illinois channel. And I'm sure the panelists are saying, great time to tell me that, Ben. but that is why we're a little awkward up here with that. Other questions? Murph?
Yeah, I appreciate the candor we got from Senator Luechtefeld and Representative Eddy about the state budget and the calculations you had to go through. I mean, as someone who's a board member, an elected official, I tend to pay more attention to those things than the average citizen. But I'm pretty surprised by what you have to say. I would have to conclude that there's probably not much hope to fix school funding in the next few years. So since that can't be done, why don't we tackle the real problem with fixing state government? There's clearly a problem at both the legislative and executive branches of our state government when we don't understand the truth of how bad things are and have been for the last number of years when it comes to state financing. So what is the answer to that? And I don't think there's time enough to answer that question, but how can we get to the point where we can tell everybody in the state the truth about the budgets and the commitments, and how many more years, now that we've got this new income tax, obviously that's all we have a problem, how many more years before we can see light at the end of the tunnel if we really do the hard things, and what are those hard things we have to do to fix state government?
Anybody want that one? Oh, Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I wish I had something like a magic wand or one of those giant checks that people often bring around, and I don't. But I can tell you about and this might have been discussed before I got here, and I apologize if it was already, the budgeting for results process, which won't change the reality of how much money we have in the budget, but may in fact change how citizens can look at the system and how it works and how they can have input. Because I think, I appreciate the fact that you said as a school board member you pay closer attention to the state budget. I think we would all be better off in the state if more folks could pay closer attention to the state budget and understand it and participate in it and be able to say, here's my sense of priorities, here's what I think the responsible thing to do is. And I think that budgeting for results system will move us a little bit closer to that direction.
In my view, there are two expenses that the state is facing that have to be reined in if we're going to have any real opportunity to prioritize, because these two are crowding out our opportunities to fund education and really many other things. One is Medicaid and the increase in the amount of money on an annual basis Medicaid is costing our state. We passed last year what we believe to be some pretty common sense reforms to Medicaid. I'll give you one of them. We thought perhaps people should have to verify their income on a regular basis in order to continue to stay on Medicaid. That passed. It has been declared to be something that's not allowable to receive the federal match. In other words, what we thought we were going to save by implementing a very common sense. Now, I'm in the school business. We verify free and reduced lunch by having people bring in an income verification, and we do it regularly. Medicaid, we don't. We do not do that. That's one. There are many other areas in Medicaid that we think can be reformed. That's one expense that is set to go up by $700 or $800 million next year. That crowds out all the growth. The second one we discussed a little bit, and that's pensions, and the increasing cost of that pension payment. So I think if we're really going to get serious about how the state finances and priorities and the budget for the future is going to get better, we have to tackle those two issues. Without tackling those to some degree, I think we're just nibbling around the edges at the problem. And those are tough issues. So I think we have to have an honest discussion about those two areas. And as Senator Luechtefeld correctly pointed out, this is something we have to solve together. And I think, and I firmly believe, we're seeing signs of that on the pension. We've had meetings all summer that resulted in some pretty good dialogue. Union officials understand that there's a problem. Certainly, the Civic Committee believes that there's a problem. There's alarms sounding everywhere. Management alliances believe that there's a problem. We need to get together and talk about how to tackle these tough issues before we really, otherwise we're just kind of, we're nibbling and we're fighting over things like $9.5 million in regional superintendent's pay when we're spending $800 million more on Medicaid.
To make you feel better, keep in mind that the income tax goes away in 4 years or 3 years, yeah. So that ought to fix things. There is and has been one change in Springfield this last year, I think, that was good. And that was, it did seem that both parties, leadership in particular, really recognized that we're in trouble. Now, I can't help believing that they recognize that long before now. If you've ever been any place I've spoken over the last 7 or 8 years, you go home very, very depressed. And I'm a long way from the smartest guy in Springfield, and I could see, and I'm going to guess there are people up here at this forum could see that we were headed for a disaster. And nothing was done. We simply pushed it off to after the next election. Let's get by. Let's take a little more money from wherever we can find it, and let's get by. And finally, you get to the point where you cannot survive anymore. You can't do those things, and that's where we're at. Now, at least it did seem, with some of the budgeting that was done this year, that everyone in Springfield seems to know and recognize and admit that we are in trouble. That obviously is a start. But you're right, it is, with what happens to the income tax? You talk to most people in Springfield, most legislators in Springfield, and you ask them, are you for keeping the income tax? And they will tell you, no, we're gonna let it die. Well, if we do, then we better figure out something, because that will make it even. Our budget people tell us that if we keep going along where we're headed right now, that when the income tax is supposed to go away, our debt will double by that time. And that's going where we think we're really saving money and we're really cutting and we're whatever, that it will double by the time the income tax has to go away. So it is scary, but at least there is a recognition that we have problems. You have to hope that the economy gets better. I think that certainly is a big part of it, and you have to hold the line for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's hard to talk about this because I think that my job has been extremely frustrating to watch us in our second week of veto session expend energy on whether or not the ROEs are going to get their $9 million that they absolutely deserve in back pay, or we work on the budget. So as legislators, I think that we are all well-intentioned, both Republicans and Democrats. We want to do the right thing, but we also have to answer to leadership. And they're the ones who determine that agenda. Preferably, I would have been much happier to work on some of the vetoes that we're supposed to be working on during the veto session, but also a couple days after we leave, we find out that now the pension payments next year are going to cost $1 billion more. That just happened to come out as we're talking about tax incentives to keep some of the Chicago area businesses in place. As we talk about making sure that we can make some payments to our 8-month or 9-month-old bills. In my particular office in Highwood, my landlord said to me, if I don't get paid in the next couple of weeks, you're out of here. I don't care who you are. And that's the feeling across the state. And it's extremely frustrating to me because I don't like to have to say to people, I don't have an answer for you. I don't have a solution for you. I wish I did, but it's not happening the way I want it to happen. And I think I've often said to some of my colleagues, and I actually have a relationship on both sides of the aisle, that maybe if we had pushed for the override of the ROEs, then it would be back in somebody else's lap, not in the municipalities' checkbook to cover the cost, and that was an easy way to get out of this whole thing. But I think we're going to have to be just as tough on leadership to make sure that the agenda is more realistic and honest, and that we're in a position where we can come up with solutions and do the right thing. So we don't come next year and have more hot topics. The hot topics are out of control. For everybody that's here that says that, they're absolutely right. I don't care what party you are, what region of the state you're from, it's out of control. And to Senator Luechtefeld, it'd be up to us collectively to do whatever it takes to get it back in control.
Quick question. What are the chances of that? Is there grumbling? We've heard a couple of rumors over the past couple of years that kind of the way out for the state for $6 billion a year is just to pass that back along to the districts. And that's exactly what happened with IMRF. So there's some of us are kind of wondering, is that the way this may go?
Well, let's separate things out here. The current unfunded liabilities to the system is not the discussion that we're talking about any shift to local. So that $5 billion figure that you used, most of that's unfunded liability. Normal cost is the part that's under discussion, and that normal cost, $800 million, is about $800 million, which is a lot of money still. But that's normal cost going forward. Now here's the issue. Well, to me, there's two significant parts of this that merit discussion. First of all, if you're going to do that, and employers are going to become responsible, school districts, to make that payment like an IMRF, then the pension benefit structure should not be decided by the General Assembly, because local taxpayers are paying for those pension benefits. Almost every single one of the pressures on the pension liability that's not funded came because a deal was struck in Springfield to add a COLA or a second year of sick leave, or you name the benefit. That wasn't done by local school districts or boards, so that's the first thing. If you're going to do that, you have to allow them to have the control over the benefits. Second thing is, we have tax caps. We, last week in the House, defeated what I thought was a very egregious bill related to tax caps that would have capped the caps. In districts that are capped, we have to, if we're going to require them to pay this new cost, we have to look at the cap and say, do we do this outside the caps? And that's a political battle that I'm telling you is going to be tremendously difficult. And for that reason, my guess is that in an election year with a new map, the chances of a majority of the House and Senate voting for a property increase locally is slim.
A couple of things with regard to the pension. And whatever group I talk to, I try to make this try to make it very clear. There is a perception out there, and most of the time it is pushed pretty hard by the unions, that the absolute reason that the pension's in trouble is that the legislature did not put in its fair share. That it's, when you get done, you leave the meeting thinking that 100% of the reason the pensions are in trouble is the legislature's fault. Now, I don't want to take any blame away from the legislature, okay? I mean, we are the biggest problem, there's no doubt. Whether you voted for that or whether you didn't vote for it, the legislature as a whole is a very big problem. So I ask our staff, would you give me a percentage of the problem of the debt? And here's what they came up with. And you know what? I have not had anyone dispute this. The IEA has not disputed it. Maybe they will try to, but here's what our staff came up with. 45% of the reason the pension is in trouble is the fact that the legislature did not put in its fair share. Not 100%, not 90%. They said 45% of the reason that it's in trouble. Some 30% has to do with perks that were added that we all wanted that were never paid for, like early retirement, things like that. So, we all wanted those things, but they were never really paid for. And then there are a couple of other issues. And we as members of that system are to blame for it. And that is, we do not die as early as we should. You're supposed to die at 65, and that's not happening. So that's another real reason that it's in trouble. And then the investments have not done, and you understand that, over the last few years. So there are other reasons why it's in trouble. And another point that I always try to make to audiences is this. I know we're having problems. I'm angry about it as you are. It should have been dealt with a long time ago. But keep in mind that one of the reasons we're in trouble, a very big reason, is we all, I don't care what you do for a living, we all seem to want more from our government. Give us this, and we elect politicians who will do that for us. Give us this. Now don't take any more money from us, but give us this. Whether we are the union, whether we are farmers, whether we are teachers, whether we are whatever, we all have to take some blame for that. We really do. And now we're to the point where we can't pay for those things, and now it's somebody else's fault. We all have made some, we all want more, and just think about your lives. We all tend to want more.
Mike. I have to tell you before I put my question on the table that I have a lot of respect for you guys stepping up to the table, and I really do respect Senator Luechtefeld's humor for this process. I'm not sure we're going to have any people volunteering to die anytime, but that's interesting. The legislators seem to have a lack of credibility, especially with the teachers, in this pension dialogue that's been going on. It seems like that the teachers, the administrators, the ROEs are all the villains when you see the dialogue coming out of Springfield. And Senator Luechtefeld, you talked about how do you make it better. I think you do that by not villainizing everybody out there. 95% of my teachers are really good in my district. And Mike Kelly from Plainfield School Board, suburban up here. And so with the pension costs, we have to, at the end of the day, have a program in place that is going to attract good teachers and administrators to stay in the system. I have a daughter and son-in-law who are teachers in Streeter and Ottawa, and they're scared to death. They're 40s, early 40s. What the heck are they going to do, and how long are they going to have to work with the changes that they realize are going to need to be made in this process? And it seems like the credibility is the $7 billion you're talking about are things that weren't paid by the legislature. The perks that were put in there by the legislature. The leadership is appointed by the legislators, the members of that ability. And the question is, how do you have credibility for that? And how are we going to have a system that provides the education that each and every one of our kids needs that are coming up? We don't get to turn them away. We just have to try and pay the bills. And you owe us $8 million right now.
Checks in the mail.
Thank you for the question. And I think what you addressed that's most significant is that question of trust, which is a much bigger issue in Illinois, right? We're the subject of lots of humor on late night TV because we have one former governor in prison and one missing, right? Probably everyone in this room, or the vast majority of them, fill out those statements of economic interest. Two sides of one piece of paper, and just about every question is something that you answer not applicable, right? Does this ring a bell? Right. Those yellow things, exactly. One of the things I'm working on, and this isn't going to resolve everything, but it gets to that issue of what kind of faith we're able to put into our elected leaders, is making that statement easier to use and making it actually mean something, making it so that we disclose things about our income and our assets that could be potential conflicts of interest, so that citizens can check that for themselves. We want to make it online and searchable. It's a small step, but it's one of those many small steps that we have to take to repair our image in Illinois, so that when we get to making those tough decisions, because that's what it really amounts to, is that there's a lot of tough decisions coming up, a lot of decisions that are going to make every person who supports them really unpopular, right? But we have to have some kind of level of trust that folks are in it, like all of you are, not for themselves, but for a vision of how we want our children to be treated, how we want our future to look as a state. So that's one small answer to that big question. And I'm going to have to take off because my favorite educator is in the back of the room. My husband, Perry, who teaches at John A. Logan College, is saying that we need to get on to the next meeting. So I want to say thanks very much, and I've got 3 offices, one here in Chicago, one in Springfield, one in Carbondale. You're close to me wherever you are. Call, write, stop by, and share your good ideas. I appreciate your work. Thanks very much.
Thank you to the Lieutenant Governor for stopping by. That was great. Are there, we have a few minutes left. Are there any more questions? I'm going to go this way first. Yes. Ralph.
I'm the superintendent of a rural school district in Western Illinois. I'm sorry that the Lieutenant Governor had to leave. We talked about consolidation. In my district, we're 300 square miles from the Quad Cities to south of Quincy. Every district along the Mississippi River has had some form of reorganization, and you cut transportation. Representative Eddy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Guys, this isn't making sense. If you want us to consolidate, we're going to incur more expense to transport kids. We're going to put kids on a bus longer. My district has a rule that kids can't ride a bus longer than an hour. I'm 300 square miles. And you cut transportation 40% over 2 years, maybe 50. Somebody's got to address that.
Well, I want to make sure we understand where the cut took place. Actually, the appropriations committees in the House and the Senate increased transportation funding over FY11. We increased it. It went from a prorated amount of about 72 or 3%, maybe 4%, to 84, 85%. That was our intent. The governor vetoed out the $90 million in transportation. Now, there's an inconsistency to that logic when applied to reorganization and consolidation. Also, it's not lost on me the inconsistency of the need for regional offices of education if you're going to promote reorganization and consolidation, because regional offices of education handle all of the public hearings and paperwork for consolidation. So if you're promoting that efficiency, the public policy that you hopefully present will be consistent. And in both those cases, as you pointed out, there is a glaring inconsistency. And, you know, I got to tell you, though, based on these budget numbers, if we look at additional cuts next year for schools and in the education budget because of the projections, I don't know how safe transportation is. I don't know how safe general state aid is. I know what we need not do. We need not fund new programs when we can't pay school districts reimbursement for transportation. And that's my biggest fear. We have some very, very good education reforms that are happening in this state and some good ideas. They're going to cost some money to implement, folks. The training that it's going to take to do properly what we need to do to evaluate teachers and principals is going to cost some money and some time. And I want to get that done as quickly as possible, but I also run a school district that has a lot of square miles, and I have to pick students up to get them to school so that they can enjoy that quality education that we're trying to provide. And unless we make the main thing, we got to get those kids to school, and in rural areas it's important. Now, Senator Garret pointed out the diversity in this state. And in Chicago, they get 3% of the line item in the transportation category. So it's not a priority in the city of Chicago that transportation be funded, okay? And unfortunately, when I look at the cuts that were made to the education budget, in a disproportionate way, transportation and regional offices of education serve rural areas. So I think the governor's cuts were particularly hard on rural parts of the state.
Also keep in mind that, you might say we could have overridden the veto. You can't override the veto unless the person who's carrying the bill calls for an override, and that wasn't going to happen. And I do believe that it would have been overridden if it had been called. I do believe that.
One more question. Tony.
I don't know how much of a question is, more than a comment regarding just the timing of providing us school districts and board members information on what's going on with the budget. We as board members, we can make difficult decisions. I know Springfield's a bigger, assembly of people, harder to make decisions timely. We're able to make those tough decisions. You guys are going to have a lot of pressure on you budget-wise, and education obviously will come under some of that pressure. I would just say to you, you need to figure out how to move up your budgetary process so that we have that information in the spring, not on June 30th, when we've already had to make decisions on teachers. I mean, a good budgeting process that any school district goes under, we pretty much know by January or February what's going on, okay, with the exception of the unknowns. And the unknowns are really what's going on in the state. And so I can't emphasize enough to you that the education part of that budget needs to be figured out well ahead of what you're providing us with. Because this year being a great example of, our guidance was don't expect the last 2 payments of categoricals was the guidance going along for most of the year. We didn't budget it. We ended up fine because we ended up getting it, but we didn't even know we were getting it until after the school year's over. And quite frankly, at that point, it doesn't do us a lot of good other than going forward. So I just can't emphasize enough how the budgetary process needs to improve in Springfield if you ever expect to get results. Because we can help. I mean, we can help from our end. We can make those tough decisions that we have to do, but we have to know ahead of time in order to make those decisions. So I would just, ask you, to work with your leadership on that. I think the budgetary process of the state takes way too long and goes way too much to the deadline. You guys got to get out in front of it like the rest of us governmental bodies do. Thank you.
So I just want to, this will be my final comment, I think, but I want to thank you for bringing that up because so you could probably tell I have a little bit of frustration inside me, but it's the process that frustrates me more than just about anything. And we find out about, it used to be, and I'm not sure it's changed a little bit, but it used to be we would get the budget 10 minutes before we were going to vote on it, 15 minutes, and so we weren't even aware of all the things, and it really takes a lot of vetting to go through a stack of papers that's probably 8 inches, 10 inches thick. But maybe what we can do, I was thinking about this when you brought it up, is it's sad that you have to put it forward in legislation, but put forward something that says that when any entity such as the ROEs or the transportation for Southern Illinois or anything that affects local governments is going to take place, that there has to be a grandfathering in of X number of, like a year, 12 months or something like that. So everybody's not caught flat-footed with nowhere to go. And we're, as legislators, finding out about it at the same moment in time. So that's a great recommendation. I know we'll take it back to Springfield.
Yeah, I just want to make a brief comment about this because for 3 or 4 years now, as I talk to superintendents around the state, and I ask them about their priorities and budgets, what would you really like to see in the education budget? Often, the very simple answer is honesty. We want you to tell us how much money we're going to get and deliver that money. Now, I think that you're right. Tough decisions are going to be necessary. The sooner you have the information, the better decisions you can make. Other laws do not align with the budget process. Even reductions in force and the legal statutory requirement of when we must dismiss teachers takes place at a time that doesn't align well with the budget process. You're probably not going to get that changed, by the way. But what we can do is send some clear signals much, much sooner. So I'm going to send you a clear signal very early. The education budget next year is going to be very difficult. And I don't know to what extent the cuts will be, but based on the revenue projections that we have, it's very likely that you will receive less money from the state next year than this year. So now one good news about the process we use this year, the money's real. It actually is there. The revenue is coming in about the way they thought it was. So the $33.2 billion used as the revenue estimate looks like it's going to hold, and the money that was calculated, albeit in some areas reduced, 95% proration in general state aid, for example, it's real money. And that's what you really want, I think, is to know really what you're going to get so you can plan accordingly and make those tough decisions.
What's that percentage on state aid again?
Well, this year it was prorated at about 95%. I think, you know, they say they didn't cut the foundation level, which is a little sleight of hand. It's a little tricky. $6,119 is still the foundation level, right? But it's being funded at about, what, $5,900?
Not going to give you the last payment.
$5,950. So you really did have it cut. It's officially $6,119, but the proration reduces that. And, you know, it's going to be very difficult to maintain that level next year based on all the projections that I'm seeing in the budget.
I've not heard anyone talk about revenue and increasing revenue. Do you really think we can cut our way out of this problem without raising revenue?
Well, the largest tax increase in the history of the state of Illinois happened about a year ago. That's revenue. Can you get another one passed? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. I really, and I know what you're talking about. But keep in mind, $7 billion new dollars are coming to into this state with a new tax increase that happened about a year ago. And I guess I would ask you, should we do some more? You know, you have a real problem when you do a lot of taxing, and that is you chase businesses out of the state, and that brings in less money. It really is, that's a problem. You know, I would like to end this by saying that we gave Representative Eddy a job to do at the beginning, and I have to say, you did a terrible job.
I was kind of doing the same thing, trying to think, what can be positive here to end this conversation? The only thing I can come up with is Congress is still more screwed up than the Illinois General Assembly.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for coming today. Please thank our panelists. There's 100 places they could have been.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.